So 2 Samuel chapter 6. David again assembled all the fit young men of Israel, 30,000. He and all his troops set out to bring the ark of God from Baal Judah. The ark bears the name of the Lord of armies, who is enthroned between the cherubim. They set the ark of God on a new cart and transported it from Abinadab's house, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the cart and brought it with the ark of God from Abinadab's house on the hill. Ahio walked in front of the ark. David and the whole house of Israel were dancing before the Lord with all kinds of firwood instruments, lyres, harps, tambourines, sistrums, and cymbals. When they came to Nacon's threshing floor, Uzzah reached out to the ark of God and took hold of it because the oxen had stumbled. Then the Lord's anger burned against Uzzah, and God struck him dead on the spot for his irreverence, and he died there next to the ark of God. David was angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah, so he named that place Outburst Against Uzzah, as it is today. David feared the Lord that day and said, "How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me?" So he was not willing to bring the ark of the Lord to the city of David. Instead, he diverted it to the house of Obed-Edom of Gath. The ark of the Lord remained in his house 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and his whole family. It was reported to King David, "The Lord has blessed Obed-Edom's family and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." So David went and had the ark of God brought up from Obed-Edom's house to the city of David with rejoicing. When those carrying the ark of the Lord advanced 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened calf. David was dancing with all his might before the Lord, wearing a linen ephod. He and the whole house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sounds of the ram's horn. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Saul's daughter Michal looked down from the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent David had pitched for it. Then David offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings in the Lord's presence. When David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of armies. Then he distributed a loaf of bread, a date cake, a raisin cake to each one in the entire Israelite community, both men and women. Then all the people went home. When David returned home to bless his household, Saul's daughter Michal came out to meet him. "How the king of Israel honored himself today," she said. "He exposed himself today in the sight of the slave girls of his subjects like a vulgar person would expose himself." David replied to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me over your father and his whole family to appoint me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will dance before the Lord, and I will dishonor myself and humble myself even more. However, by the slave girls you spoke about, I will be honored." And Saul's daughter Michal had no child to the day of her death. Church, this is the word of the Lord.
Part of being a new church is deciding what type of culture that we want to have as a church. Back when we were meeting in my home a few years ago as a core team, we had a lot of conversations talking through what we wanted our worship gatherings to be like on Sunday mornings. Talked about things like the type of songs that we wanted to sing, the types of prayers that we scripturally see that we should be praying, the different things that we should be reading throughout our service. So a lot of what you experience when you come here on a Sunday morning was intentionally decided there in that season. But what you experience when you come here on a Sunday is also a product of who is here in the room. Half the people that were part of our original core team have moved away from Pittsburgh. Since that point in time, others have come and joined the church at Mon River. But with these new people that come, they bring different Christian backgrounds, bring different personalities. They bring their own place where they are at individually in their faith. So the gathering of people in this room, it shapes who we are. For me and Chris as the pastors of this church, Even that experience may not be what we desire for us to be, but it's who we are at this stage in our church. Another factor that shapes our worship is who's leading on a Sunday morning. For us at the church at Mon River, one of our core values is diversity. So that means we intentionally have different voices, different faces leading us in worship. Diversity also leads us to have different types of songs that we sing. And so some leaders that come and lead us in music are more expressive in their worship than others. Some of the songs that we sing, they point us to truths about God in different ways, point us to different responses that we have to God. Another factor of what you experience when we come here and worship on a Sunday morning is even your own personal background. We could have two guests come on a Sunday morning and experience the exact same worship service, but have a very different perception on that experience based on their own individual background. When I was in college, I spent a season going to an African American church. They were very charismatic in their worship. If someone comes from that background and they see us here in our gatherings, they would leave thinking, man, those people are really serious. Those people are really stiff in their worship. But I know there's others that have come on a Sunday morning from more reverent backgrounds. And they've seen what takes place in this room as we worship. And I've heard people tell me things like, wow, I saw this person across the room raising their hands and singing with their eyes closed. What's that all about? Someone tell me, hey, I've never seen people clap to songs in a church service before. And so today we're going to think about what should our worship look like. We're going to look at 2 Samuel chapter 6, and we're going to see this beautiful, authentic expression of worship as David brings the ark of God into Jerusalem. And the main point that I have for us as we look at this text is that genuine worship is where fear of God and joy in God meet. Genuine worship is where fear of God and joy in God meet. As we look at this text, I hope that you will see that worship isn't just about what a band does up here as they lead us in song. It's not about what your background is, although those things certainly do matter. But what matters even more is your own heart. I hope that today you'll leave with a deeper fear of God, but also a greater joy in God. Let's look at this text together. We're just going to walk through this story. Last week, as we looked at chapter 5, we see that David was just made king over all the tribes of Israel. He moved his family to Jerusalem, and there he began to establish his base of operations. He built a palace there for his family and all of his leadership. And then we see this scene here in 2 Samuel chapter 6. It's focused around the Ark of the Covenant. It's a very important item throughout the Old Testament. It was this gold chest. Contained some of the most famous items of God. As you read through the book of Exodus, you see that within this gold chest, they placed the 10 Commandments. After they received the manna in the wilderness, they took some of that manna and they put it in a gold bowl, and they placed that manna inside of the Ark of the Covenant. Also in there was Aaron's staff that he used to perform these different works in front of Pharaoh. It turned into a snake. It's the most sacred relic for the Jewish people. They placed the Ark of the Covenant inside of their tabernacle, and this is where the presence of God rested among the people of Israel. When the Jewish people, they conquered the Promised Land, the ark traveled at the very front of their army in all of their battles. In 1 Samuel chapter 4, we didn't talk about this story, but we see that the ark of God was captured by the Philistines. It's people who were the enemy of the Israelites. This is really funny story. I encourage you to go back and read yourself, where the Philistines put the ark of God inside of their temple, the temple of Dagon. And the next day they came to the temple, and their idol of Dagon had fallen face down in front of the ark. And so they set the idol back up, and the next day they came, and not only this day had it fallen, but its head and its hands had broke off in front of the ark. So they decided to move the ark to another city. And when the ark was there in that city, it says that everyone in that city began to grow these tumors on their body. So those people say, hey, we don't want this ark here either. And so they moved it to another city. And there in that city, those people were really curious. And so they go to the ark and they open it up and they look inside of the ark. And it said that 70 people in that city died because they looked on this relic. So the Philistines, they're like, forget this. And they sent the ark back to the people of God. And then in 2 Samuel chapter 6, David, he's now beginning to assemble all of his power into Jerusalem. And he says, I want to bring the ark into my newly established capital. And so there's this huge procession to do so. It says that he gets 30,000 soldiers to come be a part of this parade. They're dancing and they're singing and they're playing their instruments. And in the middle of this parade, we see that there's some oxen that are pulling the ark on a cart. One of those oxen stumble, and this priest, Uzzah, just out of natural reaction, he reaches out to brace the ark of God to keep it from falling to the ground. It said that God struck him dead. Just imagine that you're walking down Greenfield Avenue. You see this cute little puppy tied up to a pole. You see some person walk by and they're like, oh, look at this puppy. It's so cute, so sweet. They walk up to the puppy. They go to pet it. And this puppy bites their finger off. The person's like screaming there in the middle of the road. You would be in shock at what you just observed. And the shock would have been even more so for David and these people. They went in one small moment from having this huge party to seeing this priest drop dead. As you think about this, you might be thinking, well, this seems so unfair. How could God do this? Uzzah was a good man. He was a priest. He had good intent. He was trying to keep this ark from falling to the ground. When we look at the law of Moses, we see that when God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave very clear guidelines on how the ark should be moved. He told Moses, he said that it shouldn't be placed on a cart, but instead it should be carried by these poles. He told him that it shouldn't be moved by just any priest, but by some specific priest, by the Levites, the descendants of Aaron, one who was the first priest. Mount Sinai, God gave some clear instructions to Moses on how these priests should make themselves holy before moving the ark. But all of these clear requirements of God, they were completely disregarded by David and the people that he gathered together to move the ark. They simply did what they thought was best. And the result of this was grave consequences for this man. And you might read these rules on how to move the ark and many other rules throughout the Bible. You might just think, oh, those are just a bunch of silly rules. They make absolutely no sense. But God put these rules in the Bible to teach us a specific truth. And here is this truth, that God is a holy God, and unholy people cannot be in his presence. In the story, the ark represented God's presence here on earth. And though this priest Uzzah was a good man, and though he had good intent, he was not good enough to touch God's presence and still live. And God used this incident to remind his people of this truth. And it worked. It said that David feared the Lord his God on that day. And this fear, it caused David to want the ark anywhere but in Jerusalem. He decided to change his plans, and he had it sent to another priest's house in order for this man to protect it. But very quickly, over some time, he saw that this priest was blessed in all that he did because the ark was in his house. So David changes his mind. He says, well, maybe it is safe to have this ark in Jerusalem. So he makes some plans to go and try again to move it. But this time, things were different. David paid very close attention to how God had instructed for the ark to be moved. He got the specific type of priest that was required. And they very carefully began to move the ark to Jerusalem, carrying it this time. And as they began the journey, the priests that were moving the ark, it said that they took 6 steps forward, and then they stopped. And they offered sacrifices to God. In this, we see another truth in the Bible, that unholy people can be made holy through a perfect sacrifice. God is holy, and unholy people cannot be in his presence, but unholy people can be made holy through a perfect sacrifice. Now Uzzah, he was a good man, but he was not good enough for God. The Bible tells us that even our best intentions are tainted in God's eyes. And in the days of David, unholy people could only be made right in God's eyes by the spotless sacrifice of a lamb or a bull. And so these priests, they took 6 steps forward, and they stopped, and they made themselves holy before God. And the story doesn't just end with fear and reverence for God. There's also a great amount of joy. It says this, David was dancing with all his might before the Lord. He was wearing a linen ephod. This was the attire that a priest would have wore in their day. It says he and the whole house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and with the sound of a ram's horn. I want you to think about this. Think about what dancing with all of your might look like. For many of you, you might have seen some different videos on social media of someone dancing with all of their might. Sometimes you might see some images of a little kid who's just out having a good time and doesn't care about what anyone else around them thinks.
Teaching to obey. I'm thinking while I'm speaking like I'm preaching when I pray. When you on your way, journey through your route, praise around your friends, show 'em what he's about. All you got to do is open your mouth and slide home safe. Don't worry about it. Here we go.
So there you go. That's dancing with all your might. And it says this is how David, the king of all of Israel, is walking into the city. But not everyone in this story was having a good time. we see that David's wife, Michal, Saul's daughter, she's looking out her window on her husband's behavior, and it says that she despised him in her heart. After this celebration and the feast that followed were over, David returns to his home, and he has a very angry wife waiting for him at the door. It's likely that none of you husbands in the room can sympathize with this. And this is her response to David. She says, "How can the king of Israel honor himself today? He exposed himself today in the sight of the slave girls of his subjects, like a vulgar person would expose himself." We see that his wife is sarcastic in her tone. She made the accusation that in his dancing and leaping and whirling, that David exposed himself inappropriately to the young women around him. Sounds like maybe there was a little bit of jealousy there for her. She rebukes him. She says that he wasn't acting like a king should. Instead, he was vulgar. It's like a drunk person. Maybe she's thinking that David is embarrassing her out in public. And David, he explains his behavior to his wife. He says, "It was before the Lord who chose me over your father and his whole family to appoint me ruler over the Lord's people, Israel. I will dance before the Lord, and I will dishonor myself and humble myself even more." What was David's reasoning for this unashamed joy? It was because God had chosen him to be king, chosen him over all the other people in Israel. And it was because of what God had done for him that he has this response. He says, "I could care less what you think about me. I'm going to worship God." He says, "Hey, if that makes me look like a fool in your eyes, well then, so be it. Oh, and as for these girls, they don't see me as acting like a fool. They actually honor me because of my worship for God." I'm sure for some of you, as I'm teaching through this lesson, you might have been thinking that what I did there was kind of weird. Like Joshua went from talking about God's perfect holiness and this priest dropping dead to showing some YouTube videos about people dancing without any cares. But that's the very point of this story. That David, one moment, he goes from this great fear of God to having great joy in God. David's worship at the very same time was both fear and joy. In 2 Chronicles chapter 16, David records a song in the middle of this occasion. We read an excerpt of this at the beginning of our service, but let me read a little bit more from 1 Chronicles 16. I'm going to read this first part and listen for the fear of God in these words. "For the Lord is great and highly praised. He is feared above all gods. For all gods of the people are worthless idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and joy are in his place. Ascribe to the Lord, families of the peoples. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory of his name. Bring an offering and come before him. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness." Listen to this fear. "Let the whole earth tremble before him. The world is firmly established. It cannot be shaken." But this song is not just fear. Listen to the joy in God that he also sings about. Let the heavens be glad and the earth rejoice. And let them say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Let the sea and all that fills it resound. Let the fields and everything in them exult. Then the trees of the forest will shout for joy before the Lord, for he is coming to judge the earth. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His faithful love endures forever. And say, save us, God of our salvation. Gather us and rescue us from the nations, so that we may give thanks to your holy name and rejoice in your praise. Blessed be the Lord God of Israel from everlasting to everlasting. David's actions just don't show fear and joy, but so does his song. As we think about these things, this should be our response to God as well in our worship. Listen, friend, the same God that we see in 2 Samuel 6 that struck Uzzah dead is the same God that we gather before today. And this God hasn't just lowered his standards, and now he's just cool with everybody. The book of Hebrews says that our God is a consuming fire, that he is deserving of reverence and awe. And just like this priest Uzzah, we may be good people. We may have good intentions. But unless we keep God's law to perfection, we are not holy enough to stand in the presence of Almighty God. If you have ever told just one lie, if you have ever disobeyed your parents just one time, if you've ever had one selfish thought, one unholy thought, then you fall short of God's glory. The Bible says that what we earn for our slightest imperfection is death. God is a holy God, and unholy people cannot be in his presence. This awareness should make us have the exact same response as David. We should fear the Lord our God. But there is good news. Unholy people can be made holy through a perfect sacrifice. Something better than the sacrifice of a bull has come. Hebrews chapter says, "For it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins." It continues to say, "We have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all time." Even the bulls of the Old Testament were pointing forward to the ultimate sacrifice, Jesus Christ. He is the only one who ever perfectly kept the law of God. And he gave his life on the cross as the spotless lamb, so that whoever believes in him will not perish, but will have eternal life. And in this passage, David's joy in God, it was based on the knowledge that God had chose him. We saw previously in the study of King David's life that just as David was God's chosen one, that we as followers of Jesus are also God's chosen ones. This awareness should make us have the exact same response as King David coming into the city. We should have unashamed joy. When we gather together on a Sunday, let us sing boldly. Let us clap. Let's lift our hands. Maybe some of us might even dance like a little kid. The thought should be as we gather together and worship our God. I care less what others in the room think about me. Our thought should be, God has saved me from hell because of Jesus Christ. I'm going to get in this place and I'm going to boldly give him the worship that he deserves. We should walk out those doors. We should live boldly for Jesus. We should declare his praises. The thought in our mind, you know what? If the way that I live makes me look like a fool in someone else's eyes, my coworkers or my family look down on me because of the joy that I have of my salvation, well, so be it. Have the thought in our mind, you know what? Those who love Jesus, they don't think I'm acting like a fool. They actually honor me for the way that I worship God. Our worship should have both fear of God and joy in God at the very same time. These two ideas, they're not separate from one another, but one is dependent on the other. It is only when we fully understand God's holiness and his wrath that we can fully appreciate his kindness towards us, his mercy that produces great joy. When we gather together on Sunday, the fear of God and joy in God should be easily observable by any guest who may come join us in this place. There's many churches this morning that have a lot of fear of God. Very reverent as they sing. Have a very strong focus in their songs on God's glory. Very heavy awareness of the depth of their sin. They know nothing of the joy in God. Unashamed joy of their salvation. There's also a lot of churches that are gathering this morning that have a whole lot of joy in God. Some rockin' music and a lot of dancing. Also bubble machines and strobe lights. They know nothing of the holiness of God. God that has given them clear directions on how he should be worshiped. Do a lot of things that make them feel good. I'm afraid are offending a holy God in the process. But listen, church, the point of this morning is not for us to judge other churches and how they worship, but for us to look inward at our church. If a guest comes here this morning, would they describe our service as having both fear and joy? I want to invite you to look at yourself. We just had a time of worship here earlier. Would you say that the state of your heart as we were singing this morning was one of both fear and joy? Could you be moved to tears over your sin in 1 second, and the very next chorus have tears of joy? If that's not you, well, we have one more song that we're going to sing here in just a second. I want to invite you to reflect on your heart. Do a heart reset. And if you're a guest here with us today or you're watching online later, I hope that as you hear these words, do not leave this place without knowing both the fear of a holy God, that you are a wretched sinner, but also the great joy that Jesus has paid your debt. I pray that as we sing now, that you would experience God in a way that you never have before.